Hey guys, I am here with Leslie Dixon. I'm Kristen Howerton. I blog at Rage Against the Minivan. Leslie is a sex educator with Birds and Bees Connection. We have been doing this ongoing series chatting about talking with our kids about sex and promoting healthy sexuality. So what are we doing today?
We're going to talk about the teens. We've done the little kiddos, we've done the tweens. Now it's time, I think, to really, I don't want to say have the talk, but it is time to really be honest about it and start talking to your children about this topic. Because again, if they're not getting it from you, they're going to go to their peers, and where do they get it from? Or they're going to go to the internet, and that's just not the place to get the correct information. And I was telling you that I had taught a class this week with teenagers, and they were clueless, and the parents were clueless.
The teenagers?
They were clueless. And
About sex?
About sex. And
Wow.
They were girls. They were clueless about tampons. I mean, it was just mind-boggling to me that here were these 8th and 9th graders and what little they did know, and that the reason their parents brought them was because the parents had such fear about this topic as well, and they just needed some help. And it was a great experience, I have to say. I really got to talk about anything I wanted to. I talked about STDs, and I talked about birth control. So, the talk. Well, I think first of all you have to figure out what they know and what they don't know, because
if you've waited till the teen stage, they probably know some things.
They do. I'm not sure they have the basics. And that's what I'm concerned about. I said that this group of girls, you know, I started into all these really heavy conversations, and we ended up back with how to insert a tampon, which I thought was, how can I talk about penis and vagina if we're having problems with tampons?
Or you're not clear that there are 3 holes.
Right.
Or the basics.
The basics. For the most part, they really did, and it was funny. So often when I teach the 4th grade class, and we talk about where urine comes out of and it doesn't come out of the vagina, and we have this whole conversation, and I usually said, has anyone here actually taken a mirror and looked at themselves, and they're, you know, horrified. I have to say these group of girls pretty well had that part done. It was the basics of sex and sexuality, and one of the girls asked a perfect question. It was, how do you know when you're no longer a virgin? And I thought that was such a great question, because we have this confusion around what sex is. And I think that's really a big piece, is what exactly do we consider sex and having sex? And, you know, what do we tell our young people about that? So I think for parents, to back up just a little bit, it's one of the most important things you can do is find out what they do have, what they do know.
Yeah, and you know, in the teenage stage, it's no longer just a conversation about how babies are made, which is the conversation I've had with my children.
Right.
But in the teenage age, you're also talking about their own sexual behavior.
Yes.
And their own choices.
Yes.
And their own moral code around sexuality. So if you've waited, you know, you're covering all of it. But if hopefully... if you have younger kids, hopefully this is an encouragement to you to cover the basics way earlier, so that in the teen years you can just go into that conversation around behaviors, boundaries, all that kind of stuff.
Right. You're absolutely right, because if you've been having these ongoing conversations, and this is something we've said over and over and over again, by the time they're actually in middle school and then heading into high school, if you haven't had these conversations, then you're going to have a bigger conversation, or you won't have any conversation at all. And we're back to, where do they get this information from?
Right.
And if they go to their peers, I'm saying this group of girls, their peer group wasn't any more updated for the most part. So then that leaves really the internet, and that's just not a safe place to go.
And realistically as well, in this conversation, along with boundaries, At what age do we need to talk about birth control? Because when we're talking about teenagers, in my experience as a therapist, they're starting to have sex as young as 12, 13.
We're starting basically at the middle school years with oral sex. So here's that conversation about what sex is, going back to that girl's question.
Yes.
And then this whole issue about birth control. So these are all important issues.
And intertwined.
They're all intertwined. And here's this ongoing conversation. I wouldn't sit down with your teenager and say, okay, we're going to have the big talk. But I would find something easier. So this conversation with this girl was, how do you know if you're no longer a virgin? And my really explanation for that is when you're engaging in oral, anal, vaginal sex, the exchange of bodily fluids, and you're having that relationship, you have now gone over the border of, no longer being a virgin. And you are now entering the border of risky behavior. And that was the other thing that I saw, was they didn't realize that part of the risky behavior. So along with, this topic of birth control, which we talked about yesterday, we also talked about their bodies. I gave them a basic anatomy lesson, and most of them didn't have a clue about female anatomy, still a little confused, and especially male anatomy. And
what's so crazy about that is there are kids that start having sex without that information.
They do.
One of the things that I like about what you're saying is talking about sexuality as, a wide variety of behaviors.
Right.
Because I feel like, and particularly in religious homes, we like to talk about sex as intercourse.
Right.
And virginity as intercourse.
Right.
And so, in my experience, the conversation was don't have sex.
Right.
But then what kids did is they ran out and did all of the other things. And I'm not having sex. And, I never had someone sit me down and explain, like, oral sex is still sex.
It is.
And it's super vulnerable and intimate.
That's right.
And you should think about, what your boundaries are around that. And so as uncomfortable as it is to talk to our kids about oral sex, anal sex, which research is showing
That's
that
right. They're
kids
engaging
in that
That's
more.
Right.
First of all, because of porn.
Right.
And second of all, because they think, well, I can't get pregnant this way.
Right. And I'm still a virgin. One more time, I'm still a virgin.
Which we may need to correct a little bit. But we need to have those uncomfortable conversations about how all of these behaviors are sexual behaviors.
Right.
All of them are intimate, vulnerable, risk STDs.
That's right.
So that they're informed.
That's right. So I think part of it is, incumbent on the parent to get educated. It would be very difficult to sit your children down and have these conversations if you're not educated in this area. And the majority of those parents in my room were still so uncomfortable. That same issue of when they were younger, they didn't get this information. And so I think, first of all, parents have to be educated, get themselves educated. We have courses online. We have these courses for parents, how to start the conversation, what to do about it. So there are resources out there. So what to start with? Well, first of all, we said what to start with is what does your child know and what don't they know? And then basic anatomy is really important so they understand. You're absolutely right. They're engaging in oral, anal, vaginal sex, and they don't understand in many cases basic anatomy. So I think it's really important to start with those basic pieces. And then, start moving from there. I think that boundary piece is really important. And whether it's a girl or it's a boy, that what feels comfortable, listen to that inner voice. That was a big thing I talked about is, we all have this voice that's telling us what feels right and what doesn't. And I think to really support that in young people is important, and especially giving them a voice, girls a voice, and even boys a voice of what doesn't feel right. And don't be so hung up on hurting someone else's feelings because you speak up. It's really important. So, I think boundaries is a really good place to start. And then I think you go to some of the heavier hitters and talking about sexually transmitted diseases or talking about oral, anal, vaginal sex. What is it? Basically break it down. We understand what vaginal sex is. It's penis inside the vagina. And or anal sex is obviously, whether it be the penis or, something else. These are risky behaviors, oral sex. All these very intimate topics, whether they're uncomfortable, they're important to have because these young people don't necessarily have the whole picture. They have part of the picture, but they don't have the whole picture, understanding that it's risky and understanding how important it is to not engage necessarily in these behaviors because of not only risks from STDs.
Right. Because teenagers are like in one ear out the other.
That's right. But also there is an emotional component as well. Even though their bodies are sort of hardwired for all this, that's not unusual. They start to have the feelings, that oxytocin, all those hormonal feelings sort of set them up because we haven't changed our evolution of how we, feel sexually.
Right. Kids have sexual feelings
They do.
at very young ages. And I think it's important too that we normalize this for our kids.
Yes.
It's totally normal for you to have these sexual temptations. It's totally normal for you to, kiss a boy and then, feel tingly and feel turned on. But just because you're turned on doesn't mean you have to engage in further behaviors. I also think it's really important in this day and age, especially in this age of porn where unfortunately so many kids are getting their education, for us to explain that sex is a reciprocal engagement. That it is not a performative thing that girls do for boys.
Right.
That, boys understand that, when you do engage in sexual behavior, that this needs to be going both ways. Right. That girls understand this isn't something you do to get a boy to like you. Right. That it's a dance of intimacy, and, that hopefully happens when you're a little older. But if they engage in it now, because one of the things I definitely saw counseling teenage girls was a lot of kind of performative sexual behavior, which is on the part of girls towards boys, which is scary. That's not what any of us want for our girls.
And unfortunately, that's what's out there. On the younger, age, is that when we see the statistic of oral sex in the middle school years, what we're looking at is we are looking at girls as it becomes a performance art. And why is it? Well, it's peer pressure, but it's also because they want that boy to like them. Yeah. They really believe that if they, perform oral sex, that it's going to make that boy like them more. And in many cases, it turns against them, and then they're left at a very young age feeling like there's something wrong with them, first of all, and, sexually something doesn't quite feel right. And I think what you said is very important. What we really want to do is we want to establish healthy sexuality. So when they are older, then when they do have sexual relationships, it's healthy sexual relationships. It's not dysfunctional. It's not because they want somebody to like them or peer pressure. And so I think that's a really important discussion is, what is healthy and discussing sexuality. One of the things I said to the girls, and they all laughed, is, do you really want a boy touching you before you're not comfortable with your own body? Yeah. And here's that whole topic, that taboo topic of masturbation. And it is, and yet, young babies, young children do it. And I think teenagers, and I know this is a, very challenging topic, but I think girls and boys, and I think boys are a little more comfortable with their bodies, girls not so much, but, inviting them to explore their body and know this skin is super sensitive, what feels good, not so they use it sexually necessarily outside, but even with their own bodies, what feels good, feeling good in their body. Again, it's that healthy self-esteem, self-worth. This is really establishing healthy body image and that word sexuality, which is so important.
And I think too, if we can, help kids understand that masturbation is an alternative
Right.
to sexual behavior
Yes.
with each other, then we can empower our kids to say, when you're with someone of the opposite or same sex, and you're with somebody and you're feeling really good, like you
Right.
don't have to do something right then and there. Like you can satisfy yourself
Right.
later by yourself.
Right.
You don't have to engage in sexual behavior with someone else in the moment that you're feeling like that.
And I know what we're saying right now, is very challenging and taboo. In reality, it's probably the healthiest way to introduce young people to their own sexuality and feeling comfortable in their own bodies. And I think that really plays such an important part. So I think this is really an important topic to really address. So next, I think this is a good conversation to talk about, with your child. You have to feel comfortable with it. Keep practicing it until it becomes comfortable.
Well, and I think when you start talking about sex with your teens, that's where people's own baggage,
Absolutely.
and their own shame,
Absolutely.
comes in. And so then they're feeling the shame of their own past behavior.
Right.
They're not wanting to talk about it because maybe they have some ambivalence
Yes.
about their own behavior. They're scared maybe they're going to be asked a personal question.
Truly.
Or have to share something, which
Yeah.
I don't think you do have to share.
No.
I mean, I
No.
am pretty open with my kids, but I think everyone's comfort level is going to be different on that.
What I always say about that, and I really agree with you, is that, if they come to you with that question, depending on what their age is, if you don't feel intuitive, this isn't the time, it feels appropriate, then you can speak up. This is something personal right now. I'm not ready to share. There will become a time that I will.
Right.
The most important thing is don't lie to them. Don't make up some
good.
kind of story.
Yeah.
Because they'll catch you on that. And
Yeah.
that once they catch you, they will never come back. And part of this conversation, that Kristen and I are having, is we really want to establish an open communication, connection between parent and child, because I really want them to be able to come to you. And in reality, they really do want to come to you. You're the parents, and they want to come to you. So the most important thing is start this conversation. So we talked about boundaries. We've talked about, sexuality. Now some of the nitty-gritty of it. And the nitty-gritty for this age, the teenager, is they need to understand what sexually transmitted diseases are. The statistic is 9.1, and it's a little on the low side, million teenagers contract a sexually transmitted disease each year, 15 to 19. And that is an amazing number, and it's very concerning. And we have to realize that many of those STDs are asymptomatic. So you've got these teenagers who are sexually active, and it's not just vaginal sex. It's the other sex we were talking about, and they may contract an STD. They may not know their partner has this STD, and then they're walking around with it because they may not even know they have it. So this information is vitally important. And this sort of, folds into this whole topic of abstinence and why, as a parent, we really want our children to abstain from these behaviors as long as possible. Is it reality that they're going to probably wait until they're married because the average age of marriage now is about 30? Probably not. But do we want them to wait till college and be prepared for that? Because then their emotional ability to make choices is much stronger.
And this is why I think it's vital to explain to our kids, that we have an end goal in mind.
Yes.
It isn't that we want to rain on their parade, ruin their childhood, take all the fun things away. It's that there's an end goal in mind. And that end goal is healthy adult sexuality.
Yes.
And if we can say to them, instead of what, the message I got, which is sex is bad.
Right.
But if someone had said to me, I want you to have awesome sex later.
Right.
I really want you to have good sex. And if we can explain it from that framework, that if you delay or abstain, that later on things will be better for you, and we want that for you. And if we can help them buy into that, I think that's a lot more helpful than just wait because we want you to wait, or religious reasons that are not always compelling to teenagers either.
Right. They're very smart. These young people are very savvy. And, you know, the more you're honest with them and even being a little bit empathetic and compassionate, I think they'll be, instead of that judgmental or that fear, you're going in with fear that if you give them this information, they're going to, you know, use this information.
Which is not how that works.
No, it's not. And young people know that.
Yeah.
You know, they really do know
You're
that.
not going to give your teen an idea from the sex talk that they then go out and do.
No, we're going to practice. Yeah, you've given me all this idea, and now I'm going to go practice it.
Right.
And that's not it is at all. And the more you educate them, the more you empower them, and the more you strengthen their image of their body and their mind and their spirit, then I think those are the young people who are going to think and process and make a healthy decision versus, you know, the young people, the majority of the young people, unfortunately, who are out there, and it's a very emotional, it's a very hormonal response to their own sexuality that they have no place to go to really have conversations about this.
Yeah, and I mean, what a gift if a teen felt like they could really talk about this stuff, and if they made a mistake, you know, that they could come home and say, like, I went too far, and I don't feel good about myself today.
Right.
What a gift.
All these mothers yesterday, they all said the same thing, and they said it in tears. Literally, if you have questions, we're here. We want you to come to us. You know, we'll listen to you. And I think it was so beautiful to watch this so those young girls could really hear in a very safe place. They were all in a safe place. It was a very powerful place.
Yeah.
It was a sisterhood. And they heard that mothers really do want their daughters to come to them if they have any questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really powerful, you know, place to be for young people. It just means that parents have to be brave. You have to be brave enough to have these conversations with your young people.
Yeah, it's important.
It is important.
Yeah. Well, there's so much we can say on birth control. I think we should probably do a whole episode on that one.
We will, and I want to finish up on STDs.
Yeah.
But I think we have talked a lot, and we've probably overwhelmed people in some ways, and that's good. I think we need to be honest about that, and I love this venue because the ability to be honest like this is so rare, and I appreciate it. So, thank you.
Yeah.